Full story. My mom told my boyfriend to choose my sister until I proved them all wrong. I never thought betrayal would sound so casual, so matter-of-fact, that I could almost mistake it for weather talk. But that's how it began on a humid Boston night, at my cousin's graduation party, when I overheard my own mother negotiating my future away like a business deal. The house was buzzing with champagne laughter. Plastic cups filled to the brim, the smell of barbecue clinging to the air. My boyfriend of 3 years, Hudson, had gone to grab us drinks. He'd been gone too long, and something restless pulled me toward the kitchen. My sandals clicked against the hardwood like tiny alarms. I was ready to tease him for disappearing. Instead, through the cracked door, I caught the sharp outline of my mother's voice. "She's stronger and better for you, Hudson. Olivia's the one who will push you forward." It was so blunt that I froze. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard. But then I saw them. My mother hand perched like a crown on Hudson's arm, and him holding 2 glasses of wine as if he'd forgotten what they were for. "Sophia's sweet," my mother went on, her tone warm but surgical. "But Olivia is the achiever. She just made junior partner at her firm. What's Sophia doing? Chasing sketches that no one buys." Each word sliced into me like she'd spent her whole life sharpening that knife. And maybe she had. I'd grown up with Olivia as the golden child, the trophies, the internships, the perfect GPA. I was the dreamer, with smudged pencil on my fingers selling portraits to whoever had $50 and a wall. I thought I'd made peace with that. But hearing it spoken aloud to the man I loved was like being gutted in public while everyone else kept laughing outside. The worst part? Hudson didn't recoil. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't say, "Sophia is enough for me." No, he just stood there, nodding slightly, as if he were filing away her words, weighing them like they deserved space in his mind. My mother's voice softened, almost conspiratorial. "You and Olivia always had chemistry. She's been watching you for years. She's just waiting for her chance." I wanted to storm in to scream to shatter the glasses he was holding. But my body betrayed me. My throat clamped shut, my feet rooted to the spot. I felt invisible, like I was already being erased from my own story. Hudson's reply was worse than silence. "I don't know, Mrs. Phillips. Sophia and I have been together a long time. A long time, not a lifetime. Not forever, just a long time. Something that could expire. And what do you have to show for it?" my mother pressed. "Olivia's building a future. Sophia's stuck in the clouds." Her words were acid, poured directly on every insecurity I'd hidden. All my small victories gallery showings, a handful of commissions turned to ash. My vision blurred, but I couldn't look away. I backed away from the door before they could see me swallowing the scream rising in my chest. By the time I slipped back into the party, my face was arranged into the same polite smile I'd worn all my life. The smile that said, "Yes, I understand my role in this family drama, to be the disappointment that doesn't complain." All night I laughed when people expected me to clink glasses when the toast came, while my heart hammered like it was trying to punch its way out of my ribs. That was my first mistake, pretending nothing had changed. Pretending I could survive that kind of betrayal by swallowing it whole. But betrayal doesn't sit quietly. It festers. And what I didn't know then was that those words whispered over clinking glasses would become the crack that split my entire world open. The weeks after that night, stretched like wire, pulled too tight, thin, humming, ready to snap. I kept replaying my mother's voice, her words looping in my head. "She's stronger and better for you. Olivia's the achiever." At first, I tried to tell myself it hadn't mattered, that Hudson had brushed it off. But the unraveling came quietly, like rot under the floorboards. It started with small things. Hudson mentioned Olivia in passing too casually. "She crushed that case last week," he'd say, while we ate, takeout, eyes lit in a way I hadn't seen when he talked about me in months. He praised her new fitness routine like he'd been studying it. At family dinners, I'd catch him glancing across the table just long enough for me to notice. A smile shared in silence, as if I were the extra at their private performance. When I asked about it, he brushed me off. "She's your sister. Wouldn't it be weird if I didn't get along with her?" His tone was so reasonable, it made me feel paranoid, like jealousy was a defect I had to hide. I laughed it off, pretended I was fine, but every time my phone buzzed, a knot coiled in my stomach. Then came the cancellations, a gallery opening I wanted him to attend, a work emergency. A Saturday brunch we planned, a last-minute meeting. My art felt smaller each time he skipped it. Like even I wasn't convinced it was worth showing up for anymore. I found texts on his phone, nothing overt, just lunch tomorrow, or "Congrats on the win, you deserve it." They were harmless enough on paper, but the harm was in what he didn't tell me. That he was seeing her, talking to her, letting her slip into spaces of our life where I hadn't been invited. I confronted him once, heart pounding, as I held his phone out. "Why didn't you tell me you were meeting her?" He barely looked up. "Because it's nothing. Don't make this bigger than it is." That's the kind of gaslighting that doesn't scream, it whispers. It makes you question your own eyes, your own instincts. And I let it work on me. I told myself I was imagining the way his touch felt distracted, the way his goodnight kisses landed half a beat too late. My best friend Tessa saw it before I admitted it. One night after dinner, she pulled me aside. "He doesn't look at you the same anymore? It's like he's somewhere else?" I snapped at her, defensive. "We're just in a rough patch." But when I went home and lay in bed next to him, his body turned slightly away, I knew she was right. Rough patches are supposed to be weathered together. This felt like I was standing in the storm alone while he watched from Olivia's umbrella. I tried to bury myself in my sketches, but even my art betrayed me. My hand would drift, lines curving into her silhouette, her sharp jaw, her immaculate hair. Every page ended up looking like her, as if my subconscious was mocking me. At dinner one evening, my mother leaned across the table, her voice dripping with sweetness that only I recognized as venom. Olivia. Dear, tell Hudson about your firm's new project. And there it was again, that triangulation. She wasn't just my mother. She was the stage manager of my humiliation, arranging the spotlight so that I'd fade into the wings. Hudson leaned forward, eager, hanging on Olivia's words like he'd forgotten I was sitting inches away. I smiled through the burn in my chest, every bite of food tasting like ash. That night, I stared at the ceiling until dawn, wondering when exactly I'd lost him at the kitchen door at the first canceled date, or long before, when my mother decided my dreams would never be enough. The unraveling was slow, but it was steady. And I could feel it, the rope holding us together, fraying thread by thread, until all it would take was one sharp pull to send everything crashing down. The day the truth split open wasn't cinematic. There was no storm outside, no thunderclap as the universe announced the end. It was a gray Boston afternoon, thick with drizzle, the kind where the sidewalks glisten, and the city feels like it's holding its breath. I'd bought Red Sox tickets, good seats, the kind we used to splurge on once a year. Baseball was our thing, the ritual that made us feel like kids again, eating peanuts and screaming at foul balls. I thought maybe it could be our reset button. Maybe if I reminded him of who we used to be, we could crawl back to that place. I even rehearsed the surprise in my head walk and waved the envelope, watch his face light up. But what I found instead turned that envelope into an obituary for everything we'd built. Hudson's apartment door clicked open with my key, the one he'd given me back when forever still felt like an option. Inside, the air was warm, heavy, with the faint smell of wine and perfume that wasn't mine. Then I saw at the trail, a designer blazer crumpled on the floor, heels tipped on their sides like discarded punctuation. My stomach dropped before I even reached the bedroom. The door was ajar. Sounds drifted out, soft, unmistakable, intimate. My hands trembled as the tickets slipped from my grasp, scattering across the hardwood like paper shrapnel. I pushed the door wider. There they were. Olivia's long hair spilling across Hudson's bare chest, her nails dragging lazy arcs on his skin. Their heads snapped toward me, but the scene was already branded into my skull. Hudson scrambled upright, panic painting his face. Sophia, this isn't. Don't! My voice was steady, alien to my own ears. Don't tell me it's not what it looks like. I'm not an idiot. Olivia didn't flinch. She just stared at me, her expression more annoyed than guilty, as if I'd barged in on a meeting she intended to finish later. That look stung worse than the act itself, like my heartbreak was just an inconvenience to her. How long, I asked, though the answer felt like poison I already knew the taste of. Hudson dropped his gaze. 2 months. But we've been talking since your mom. The sentence cut itself off, but I didn't need him to finish. Since your mom spoke to me, the kitchen conversation, the seed had sprouted exactly how she'd planned. My vision blurred, but I didn't cry. No screaming, no begging, no theatrical scene to match the betrayal. Just a hollow ache expanding inside me, swallowing every ounce of air. I turned and walked out, leaving the tickets scattered like confetti after a funeral. In the elevator, I pressed my palms against the cold metal walls, waiting for the sobs that never came. The numbers above the door blinked down floor by floor, each ding marking the death of the future I thought I had. By the time I stepped out onto the rainy street, I wasn't Sophia who had a boyfriend anymore. I was just Sophia, wet hair plastered to my cheeks, clutching at nothing but the knowledge that my mother had orchestrated the whole damn thing, and that Hudson had played his role without hesitation. The betrayal wasn't a storm. It was a quiet dismantling. And now I was standing in the ruins. I don't even remember driving home. The city blurred past like a watercolor left in the rain. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. The lights in the kitchen glowed soft and golden, the same way they had when I was a child sneaking in after curfew. Except this time, I wasn't carrying excuses. I was carrying the weight of betrayal so heavy, it nearly broke me in half. She was there, arranging flowers in a crystal vase, humming as if the world hadn't just crumbled under my feet. My mother, the woman who had taught me how to braid my hair, who corrected my posture at dinner, who never missed a chance to remind me that appearances are everything. I slammed the door behind me. The sound startled her, but she didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She already knew why I was there. Why? My voice cracked the single word tearing out of me like it had claws. Why would you do this to me? She placed one last lily into the vase, adjusted its angle, and only then did she glance over her shoulder. Don't be so dramatic, Sophia. Relationships end. Hudson and Olivia. They make sense together. You must see that. My hands curled into fists at my sides. You stood in that kitchen and told my boyfriend to leave me for my sister. And now you're telling me to accept it? Her expression didn't waver, but I caught it, the flicker of disdain she'd been hiding for years. I was protecting you from wasting time. Olivia is driven, ambitious. Hudson deserves someone who will push him forward. You're... She let her gaze slide over me from my messy hair to the paint stains on my shirt. You're still chasing your little art projects. The words hit like glass shattering in my chest. Little art projects. My degree, my exhibitions, the sketches I'd poured my soul into, they'd never been real to her. Just childish distractions compared to Olivia's corner office and designer suits. You've always been wrong about me. I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and sorrow. And you always will be. For a second, silence hung between us. The kind that feels like a noose tightening. She leaned closer, her tone soft but poisonous. You'll thank me one day, Sophia. When you finally grow up, that was it. That was the moment I realized my mother wasn't just complicit. She was the architect, the betrayer behind the curtain, and she would never ever see me for who I was. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that vase against the wall just to see her perfect little world crack. But instead, I turned away. Because the truth was sharper than any shard of glass, I didn't need her approval anymore. I walked out of that kitchen with nothing but my car keys and a heart full of scars. The night air bit at my skin, but it felt cleaner than the air inside. Behind me, the house glowed warm and hollow like a stage set after the actors have gone home. My mother's voice called out one last time, sharp and certain, you'll regret this. Maybe I would, but not as much as I'd regret staying. By dawn, I was throwing clothes into boxes, my movements jerky and desperate. Every folded shirt, every sketchbook stuffed into a suitcase, felt like tearing roots from soil I no longer wanted to belong to. Tessa, my best friend since freshman year of college, showed up without me even asking. She took one look at my tear-stained face and didn't ask questions. She just started packing dishes while cracking nervous jokes that only made me cry harder. You're not running away, she said, firmly, brushing hair out of my eyes as we loaded the last box into my trunk. You're relocating, reclaiming your life. But it felt like running. The streets of Boston, the same ones I'd sketched in my journals since I was a teenager, blurred in the rearview mirror as if they were already forgetting me. Every landmark, the bookstore on Charles Street, the cobblestones near Quincy Market, whispered a reminder you were never enough here. Seattle had always been a dream, whispered late at night over glasses of cheap wine. A city of rain and artists and fresh starts. And now it was my only option. I had a few $1,000s in savings, a car that rattled if you pressed the brakes too hard, and a portfolio of work that my mother would never consider real. The drive west felt endless. Days blurred into nights, the interstate stretching like a scar across the country. I slept in motels that smelled of damp carpet and desperation. I ate takeout in parking lots staring at headlights and wondering if I'd lost my mind. But with each mile, I felt something loose, like a fist unclenching around my throat. Boston's suffocating expectations receded in the rear view. And with every rain cloud that gathered as I crossed into Washington, I felt closer to something I hadn't dared believe in: freedom. When I finally pulled into Seattle, the city greeted me with a downpour. Fat drops splattered against my windshield, blurring the skyline into a watercolor dream. I parked outside a budget motel, unloaded my boxes into a room that smelled faintly of mildew, and collapsed onto the bed. The ceiling was cracked, the sheets thin, the heater rattling. But it was mine. I gave myself 10 minutes. 10 minutes to cry for everything I'd lost, the boyfriend I thought I knew, the sister I thought I could trust, the mother I thought loved me. And then I wiped my face, opened my laptop, and started searching. Jobs, apartments, anything to make this city more than just an escape route. The first week was brutal. Craigslist apartments were either laughably overpriced or smelled like cigarettes and regret. Job applications disappeared into a digital void, rejection emails arriving like clockwork. My savings dwindled. Fear clawed at me at night, whispering that I'd crawl back to Boston, tail between my legs, proving my mother right. But I didn't. I found a shoebox apartment in Capitol Hill, 5th floor, walk-up with creaky floors and a view of a brick wall. The kind of place that would make my mother roll her eyes. But when I signed the lease keys jingling in my hand, I felt something like triumph. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't glamorous. But it was a beginning. And beginnings were all I had left. The first month in Seattle tested me more than I thought possible. My savings bled away like water through a cracked jar. Rejection emails stacked up in my inbox, polite words that all meant the same thing: not you. I ate instant noodles for dinner more nights than I cared to admit, sketching by the glow of my desk lamp in a room so small I could stretch my arms and nearly touch both walls. Still, there was a flicker of something my mother could never smother: stubbornness. Each morning, I dragged myself to interviews for positions I didn't want: receptionist, retail, anything that might cover rent. I rehearsed lines in the mirror. I'm a quick learner. I'm dependable. I just need a chance. But inside, shame gnawed at me. I had left Boston to prove I was more than my mother's dismissal. Instead, I felt like a failure playing dress-up in a thrift store blazer. Then came Cascade Ventures. A tech startup buzzing with ambition and caffeine, its office tucked inside a renovated warehouse that smelled of fresh paint and espresso. I had applied for an admin role I barely understood. The woman in HR greeted me with a smile, then dropped the first blow. That position's been filled, she said, almost apologetically. My stomach sank. Another dead end. But then she added, one of our founders wants to meet you. He saw your resume and thinks you might be a fit for something different. That's how I met Zachary Edwards. His office looked nothing like the glossy spaces I'd seen in movies. Papers stacked haphazardly, empty energy drink cans scattered across the desk, and a whiteboard crowded with equations I couldn't decipher. He wasn't polished like the executives I imagined. His flannel shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly mussed, but his eyes sharp, restless, studied me like I was a puzzle worth solving. Sophia Phillips, he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his expression curious. You're the artist from Boston. The word artist on his lips startled me. No one had called me that with respect before. I almost corrected him, explained that my degree hadn't paid off, that I was just trying to survive, but something in his tone stopped me. Yes, I said quietly. He leaned back, crossing his arms. So why apply to a tech startup? Doesn't exactly scream canvas and brushes. I could have lied. I could have spun some story about career goals. Instead, I told the truth, the words slipping out before I could second guess them. Because sometimes you have to leave everything behind to figure out who you really are. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Honest. I like that. He flipped through my resume, which was more art exhibitions and part-time gigs than anything corporate. This job's not easy. I need an assistant who can keep up. Long hours, chaos, a boss who forgets to eat half the time. Think you're up for that? I thought of my mother's constant critiques of Hudson's betrayal, of every night I'd spent doubting myself. Then I looked Zachary in the eye. I've handled demanding before, and I learned fast. Silence stretched. Then he nodded once decisive. You're hired. Start tomorrow. I walked out of that office clutching the offer like it was oxygen. For the first time since Boston, I felt the faint stirrings of possibility. Not just survival, but the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. What I didn't know then was that Zachary Edwards would change everything. The first weeks at Cascade felt like being tossed into a storm without an umbrella. Zachary was relentless up before dawn, coding until midnight, his brain sprinting 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He expected me to keep up, and at first I barely did. My calendar looked like a battlefield, meetings shoved against investor calls, deadlines, scribbled across sticky notes, my own handwriting, barely legible from the pace. But amid the chaos, something unexpected bloomed. He trusted me. Not in the way bosses trust assistants to fetch coffee or answer phones, but in the way people trust you with the fragile scaffolding of their vision. I learned quickly that Zachary wasn't like other tech founders. He didn't care about shiny offices or networking parties. He cared about ideas, the kind that could light up his tired eyes even after 18 hours of work. Sustainable tech solutions, affordable and accessible, designed for small businesses instead of corporate giants. It wasn't about money for him, it was about impact. And for the first time, I saw how my own skills, organization, empathy, and artist's eye for detail could be more than frivolous. They could build something real. Late nights blurred into early mornings. I arranged meetings, restructured workflows, even taught myself enough tech jargon to avoid looking lost in investor pitches. He noticed. One evening, as I stayed late organizing his files, he paused staring at me as if I'd surprised him. Why are you still here, he asked. I didn't even look up from the stack of papers. Because the job's not done. He chuckled, the sound low and warm. You know, most people would have quit by now. Then I'm not most people, I said before I could stop myself. Something shifted in the air between us that night. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was recognition. 2 people carrying their own scars, their own stubborn will to prove themselves. Over lunches, grabbed from food trucks and coffee breaks stolen between meetings, fragments of his life slipped out. He collected vintage guitars. His parents never believed in his crazy ideas. He once slept on a friend's couch for 6 months while writing the code that would eventually land him his first investor. In turn, I told him pieces of my story carefully edited, omitting the rawest betrayals. But even in half-truths, I felt something I hadn't in years understood. 6 months in, Zachary dropped a bombshell over takeout containers littered with soy sauce packets. I'm leaving Cascade, he said, eyes bright with a reckless kind of certainty. I'm starting my own company, and I want you to join me, not as an assistant. As operations manager. The title felt too big, like a coat I hadn't grown into yet. Why me? I asked, half laughing. I barely know this industry. Because you get people, he said simply. You keep things from falling apart. I can build the product, but you build the structure. I need that. I stared at him, chopsticks frozen in midair. It was insane. Risky. Exactly the kind of leap my mother would call irresponsible. But my gut whispered something else. This is your chance. So I said yes. Not because I was fearless, but because for the first time in years, I wanted to believe in something bigger than survival. We launched Edwards Innovations from my tiny apartment, the dining table doubling as our first conference room. I took a part-time job at a local gallery to cover bills while Zachary pitched to clients. Some nights, we barely scraped by. Others, we celebrated small wins with cheap wine and laughter that made the walls feel less narrow. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't certain. But it was ours. And slowly, Seattle began to feel like home. The early days of Edwards Innovations were a blur of caffeine, sleepless nights, and fragile hope. We worked from my cramped apartment laptops balanced on the dining table that wobbled if you leaned too hard. Bills piled on the counter, reminders of how close failure always hovered. But we kept going, because giving up wasn't an option, not for him and not for me. Our first big breakthrough came almost by accident. A small wind energy startup run out of a garage by 2 brothers with big ideas, and no money took a chance on us. They didn't want the glossy pitch decks of the bigger firms. They wanted authenticity. Zachary's passion and my carefully polished presentation gave them just that. When they signed the contract, I remember staring at the paper, my hands trembling. It wasn't just a client. It was validation, proof that we weren't crazy. That night, we celebrated with takeout Thai food and a bottle of cheap champagne I'd been saving for some imaginary occasion. We drank straight from the bottle, laughing until tears streaked down our faces. For the first time, I believed we might actually make it. But it wasn't just the company growing. Something else was changing too quietly, steadily, between Zachary and me. It started small. The way his hand brushed mine when passing me a stack of notes. The late nights when exhaustion made him loosen his guard, sharing stories about childhood dreams and failures. The moments he looked at me, not like an assistant or even a partner, but like someone he trusted with parts of himself no one else saw. I tried to ignore it, tried to shove the feeling into a box labeled too risky. but the box kept breaking open. One night, after a brutal week of pitches and rejections, I spilled coffee all over his notes. I froze, panic rushing through me. But instead of snapping, Zachary crouched beside me, blotting the papers with napkins, his face calm. "It's just paper," he said gently. "We've got backups. Breathe." No one had ever told me to breathe like that before. Not my mother, not Hudson. Their words had always carried weight, expectations, judgment. Zachary's carried only reassurance. And in that moment, I felt seen. The first spark came a few weeks later. We were walking back from a client meeting. Seattle rain pouring down in sheets. We ducked under a street lamp, both of us soaked through. He looked at me, rain dripping from his hair, and something shifted. Without thinking, he leaned in. His lips brushed mine, hesitant, questioning. It lasted only a second before we pulled apart, breathless, both of us startled by the weight of it. "This could ruin everything," I whispered, my heart racing. Or he said softly, "It could be everything." We didn't talk about it after that, not right away, but the air between us was charged, humming with a possibility we were both too scared and too hopeful to name. We told ourselves it was just a moment, a slip in the rain, an accident of timing and exhaustion. But accidents don't linger in the air like static. They don't haunt you in late-night silences when you're sitting 2 feet apart pretending to work while your heart beats like a drum. The truth was simple. We were no longer just business partners. We were something else, something undefined, something dangerous, and something I couldn't bring myself to walk away from. At first, we danced around it. Long days at the office where our hands brushed over keyboards, where our knees bumped under the table and neither of us pulled back. Long nights where takeout containers littered the floor and our laughter sounded too much like relief. But the line finally snapped one night when the weight of everything, deadlines, doubts, debts, pressed too hard. We just lost a client we desperately needed. I found Zachary sitting in the dark shoulders, slumped, the glow of the computer screen painting shadows under his eyes. "This was a mistake," he muttered, his voice raw. "I should have stayed at Cascade. We're drowning." Something inside me refused to let him fall into that abyss. I crossed the room, took his face in my hands, and said, "You're not alone in this. We're in it together." When he kissed me, then there was nothing hesitant about it. No rain, no excuses. Just two people clinging to each other in the wreckage, desperate to believe in something. We tried to keep it quiet, to draw neat lines between love and business. But the truth bled everywhere. In the way his hand lingered on my back when we walked into meetings, in the way he lit up when I spoke during presentations, in the way I found myself working harder not just for me, but for us. The company grew, slowly, at first, 1 client, then 2, then a ripple of word of mouth. We moved out of my apartment into a tiny office that smelled of paint and possibility. We hired interns, then staff. Each milestone was a triumph. We celebrated together with cheap champagne, late-night pizza, or sometimes just a quiet moment of shared silence, both of us knowing how far we come. But ambition is a double-edged blade. It sharpened us, drove us, bonded us. And it also tested us. We fought more often. Not about us, never directly, but about the company. I wanted stability. To secure steady clients, to build a safety net. Zachary wanted growth. To chase big risks, swing for the fences. One fight still echoes in my memory. We were sitting across from each other, a spreadsheet between us, numbers bleeding red. "If we sink everything into this project, we could lose it all," I said, my voice sharp with fear. "If we don't, we'll never grow," he shot back, frustration crackling in the air. "And what if we can't survive the loss?" His jaw clenched. "Then what's the point of surviving?" The silence that followed was brutal. We loved each other. But love wasn't a shield against ambition. It was fuel, and fuel can burn everything if you're not careful. Still, we found our balance. Compromises made in the quiet hours. Apologies whispered between kisses, promises that we'd figure it out together. And for a while, that was enough. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the girl left behind. I was someone's equal, someone's partner. And that changed everything. The months that followed felt like watching a seed burst through soil, growing faster than we could stake it. 1 client turned into 5, then 10. Local papers started writing about us, the startup that could. I still have the clipping pinned to a corkboard, the ink smudged from where my fingers lingered too long. We signed our first major contract a year in. I remember the moment clearly, Zachary and I standing in a borrowed conference room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a pen trembling in my hand. When the ink hit paper, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding since Boston. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was victory. We rented a real office, small, but ours. Painted the walls, ourselves argued over whether the coffee machine was a luxury or necessity. I won that one and hired a handful of employees who believed in us enough to take the leap. For the first time, I felt like more than an artist turned secretary, more than the daughter who never measured up.
I was building something. But success has a way of magnifying shadows. Mine followed me across the country. It started small late-night texts from my mother, carefully worded guilt, wrapped in concern. "Are you eating enough? Don't forget Olivia's birthday."
Then messages that cut deeper. "Hudson and Olivia just bought a condo. They're thriving, you know. You could be too if you'd stayed focused." I deleted them, but the words burrowed anyway. Some nights, lying next to Zachary, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if she was right. If all of this, my life in Seattle, the company, even my love with Zachary, was just a fragile bubble waiting to burst. The real blow came during one of our first industry galas. I wore a thrifted black dress I'd altered myself, a string of pearls Zachary had surprised me with. For once, I felt like I belonged in a room full of power suits and practiced smiles. Until I spotted them. Olivia, Hudson, my mother. They hadn't seen me yet, and for a moment, I stood frozen, watching them move through the crowd, with the ease of people born to be admired. Olivia's laugh, still sharp Hudson trailing behind like an accessory. My mother's hand resting proudly on her arm, as if she were displaying her prized daughter. My chest tightened. Suddenly, I was 16 again, holding up a sketch only to have it dismissed as cute. I wanted to run, to slip out unnoticed before their eyes found me. But then, Zachary's hand found mine under the table, grounding me. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just ghosts." He didn't press. But later, when I excused myself to the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. My makeup was flawless, my hair carefully pinned, my dress elegant in its simplicity. And yet behind my eyes, the same doubt lingered. What if I'll never escape them? That night, lying awake, I realized something. Success wasn't enough to silence the voices of my past. Not my mother's, not Olivia's, not even my own. And until I confronted them, they'd keep finding ways to bleed into my present. The gala shimmered with glass walls and warm light. The kind of event where people smiled too widely and champagne flutes never seemed to empty. For me, it was supposed to be a night of triumph. Our company had secured a partnership with Horizon Tech, and Zachary wanted to celebrate publicly polished, confident, undeniable. But the universe has a cruel sense of timing. They arrived together. My mother in a black gown that whispered authority. Olivia sleek and sharp in emerald silk Hudson, in a tailored suit that probably wasn't even paid for by him, but by her. They swept into the room like they owned it, drawing glances and whispers. For a heartbeat, no one saw me. And then my mother's eyes found mine. Her smile was polite, almost proud, but the kind that hides a knife. She crossed the room with Olivia at her side, Hudson trailing like he'd forgotten how to stand tall. "Sophia," my mother cooed, air kissing my cheek as if the last time we'd spoken hadn't ended with her tearing my life apart. "You've done well for yourself?" "Done well." 2 words that stung more than any outright insult. Done well was how you describe someone who'd managed to survive when you never thought they would. "Thank you," I replied evenly, my hand finding Zachary's. "This is my husband, Zachary Edwards, CEO of Edwards Innovations." Olivia's eyes flicked calculating. She extended her hand to Zachary, her nails painted a precise crimson. "Your company's growth has been impressive. Truly. It must be nice to have someone with Sophia's creativity." The pause was deliberate, designed to remind me of the years my art had been treated as a hobby. But before I could respond, Zachary did. "It's more than creativity," he said, his tone warm but firm. "Sophia's systems are the backbone of everything we do. Without her, this company doesn't exist." For a moment, Olivia's mask slipped. Hudson shifted awkwardly, eyes darting anywhere but at me. "Welcome to the team," I added, letting the words linger. Horizon Tech was now under our umbrella, which meant that Hudson, of all people, would be answering to me. The shock was subtle but unmistakable. My mother's lips pressed tighter. Olivia's shoulders stiffened. Hudson finally looked at me, his face pale, and for once I didn't feel small under his gaze. I felt tall. Later in the evening, my mother cornered me at the dessert table, her smile gone, her voice low. "I always knew you'd land on your feet," she murmured, rewriting history like she always did. "Olivia may have had a head start, but you had grit." I looked at her, at the woman who had undermined me for years, who had whispered poison into Hudson's ear. "Did you?" I asked softly. "Because I remember you telling him I was stuck in the clouds." Her face froze, caught between denial and regret. "A mother pushes her children," she said, at last her voice sharp with defensiveness. "You needed motivation." "No," I corrected gently but firmly. "I needed belief. And you never gave me that." Behind us, Olivia and Hudson appeared. Olivia, flawless but tense, leaned in. "Your husband is a force," she said, her words, half admiration, half envy. "You've landed well." I smiled, the kind of smile that came from truth. We didn't land. We built. Together. For the first time in my life, I saw clearly the cracks in their perfect facade. Olivia's hunger disguised as confidence. Hudson's silence disguised as loyalty. My mother's control disguised as love. And me, I wasn't the weak one anymore. I was free. The rest of the gala passed in a blur of speeches and applause, but their faces stayed with me. Not because they held power over me anymore, but because I realized they didn't. They were smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had simply grown. When Zachary and I slipped out into the cool Seattle night, hand in hand, I exhaled a weight I'd been carrying for years. "How do you feel?" he asked, watching me closely. "Like I finally stopped being their shadow," I whispered. And in that moment, I knew the real showdown hadn't been about them at all. It had been about me choosing myself, my voice, my life. The museum lights dimmed as the gala wound down, leaving only the soft hum of servers clearing glasses and the echo of polite goodbyes. I should have felt victorious. I had shown them, my mother, Olivia Hudson, that I wasn't the fragile girl they once dismissed. I was standing on a stage I had built myself beside a man who believed in me. But as Zachary and I sat in our quiet kitchen later that night sharing leftover cakes straight from the box, a strange hollowness crept in. Victory didn't taste as sweet as I imagined. Because deep down, there was still the question I hadn't answered: what now? My mother had cornered me at the dessert table, rewriting history as she always did. Olivia had offered her calculated compliments. Hudson had looked like a ghost of the man I once thought I'd marry. and I had smiled, held my ground, and walked away. Yet their shadows lingered, threatening to seep back into my life if I allowed even the smallest crack. Zachary studied me as I pushed a fork through the frosting. "You don't look satisfied," he said gently. "I'm not sure if I am," I admitted. I don't know if this was closure or just another battle in a war I never asked for. He reached for my hand. "Closure doesn't come from them, Sophia. It comes from you." His words sank into me like rain into dry soil. All night, I'd been waiting for them to give me something, a sign of regret, an apology, a validation I had craved for years. But none of that mattered. The real question was whether I could close the door myself. The next morning, my phone buzzed with missed calls and a message from my mother. "We should talk. Family is family. Don't forget that." I stared at the screen, my chest tight. Family, a word she wielded like a chain. Family meant loyalty, sacrifice, obedience. But it had never meant safety, belief, or love, not from her. For a moment, I almost typed back, "Old habits are hard to kill." Then I stopped. I opened my sketchbook instead, the one I hadn't touched in weeks, and began to draw. Not them, not me, just shapes, colors, movement, something alive and mine. Hours passed, and the silence of not replying felt louder than any confrontation. It was my boundary made real. That evening, Zachary came home with takeout and I told him. I didn't respond, and I won't. Not now. He smiled softly. "That's not revenge, Sophia. That's freedom." And maybe he was right. Revenge would have been rubbing their failures in their faces. Closure was simply refusing to let them write the ending of my story. I looked at the man beside me, at the life we'd built in a city that had once felt foreign, but now felt like home, and I realized something. They could never take this from me. Not anymore. So if you're watching this wondering what I chose, it wasn't revenge. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was something quieter but infinitely more powerful. It was the choice to move on. Ask yourself, if your own family tried to dismantle your worth, would you keep fighting for their approval, or would you finally walk away and build your own peace? I made my choice. And maybe for the first time in my life, it was enough. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If it spoke to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I always love reading them. Your support keeps these full story journeys alive.